"I'm not ready for that. I can't ruin my life now," Samuel's last words, before closing the door of the apartment they once shared. That night, Beatrice realized she was alone in the world. Her only refuge was her Aunt Clara's house, a severe woman who never hid the disdain she felt for her. Always. "So naive, Beatrice. You never learn," repeated the woman with a disapproval look. Life at Clara's house was a prison. Beatrice not only endured daily insults, but was also forced to pay all household chores. Since she was pregnant and unemployed, Clara made a point of reminding her that her presence there was a favor, but the worst moment of his life was yet to come. One night, Beatrice woke up with an excruciating pain. She tried to call her aunt, but received only an impatient scream in response. "If you turn it alone, you chose this way." Desperate, Beatrice managed to call a taxi and go to the hospital on her own. Hours later came the news that destroyed what was left of his soul. The baby did not survive. The world around you collapsed. The dream of being a mother, the hope of a new life, everything was torn from her in a single moment. Upon returning home, his aunt just grunted, "Less a mouth to feed." It was there that Beatrice understood. She would never have support. She would never have love there. If I wanted to start over, I would have to do it alone. She decided to leave without looking back. The years that followed were hard. Beatrice worked tirelessly, often in more than one job at the same time, to rise. He studied at night, graduated in business, and after much persistence got a position in a renowned financial consulting firm. And that's where he met Daniel. Unlike any man he had ever known, Daniel was enigmatic, reserved, but at the same time captivating. He did not stand out only by the impeccable suit or the penetrating look, but for the way he carried an imposing presence. Beatrice noted that he always seemed to observe her in the corridors, as if she knew more about her than she should. At first he thought it was imagination, but soon it was clear that Daniel had a genuine interest in her. Not knowing exactly why she was attracted, perhaps it was the way he treated her with respect and admiration, something she had never experienced before. Or maybe it was because for the first time someone saw their true value. It was only months after Beatrice discovered the truth about Daniel. He was not just any executive, he was the company's CEO, the owner of everything. The revelation caught her by surprise, but contrary to what he expected, Daniel did not change his behavior. He was still the same attentive man, the same man who made a point of listening to his opinions and encouraging her to grow. And before he realized, Beatrice was in love. The relationship between the two flourished unexpectedly. She, who had spent her life discredited, was now with a man who valued her in every detail. Meanwhile, Samuel, his ex-fiancé, followed a different trajectory. After years of parties, unbridled spending, and wrong choices, he saw his fortune decrease dramatically. He realized too late that he had wasted the best thing he has ever had, Beatrice. It was then that he decided to look for her. Samuel invited her to lunch under the pretext of a friendly conversation. He wanted to see her again, to know how it was, and deep down he expected him to regain it. But when Beatrice finally entered the luxurious restaurant, Samuel was speechless. She was no longer the insecure and fragile woman he had left behind. She walked with elegance, confidence, and beside her was Daniel, the man who had helped her to rebuild her life. Samuel felt a knot in his throat as he realized the truth. Beatrice was no longer the girl he could manipulate. She had become a powerful, independent, and happy woman. During lunch, Samuel tried to redeem himself, apologized, confessed his regrets. But Beatrice, with a serene smile, just said, "I had to lose everything to find my true value, and you were just a lesson on the way." Samuel swallowed hard. For the first time, he realized that there was no room for him in her life, and at that moment, he knew. I had lost Beatrice forever. While she and Daniel left the restaurant holding hands, Samuel just watched. He never knew what true love was. But now I understood that Beatrice had found. And he he would just stay behind. So she thought Samuel remained sitting at the table for a long time, staring at the untouched glass of wine. The restaurant was still full. Laughs and conversations filled the atmosphere, but for him it seemed muffled, distant, as if the world around him had lost the sound. He never imagined that Beatrice again would make him feel so small. In the following days, your mind was consumed by the meeting. He spent clear nights remembering the past, questioning his choices, and above all feeling a restlessness he had never experienced before. It was like something inside him was slowly breaking. The pain of realizing that he had lost Beatrice was unbearable. He tried to convince himself that he could still reverse the situation. Perhaps, if he insisted, if he was sorry, she would forgive him. After all, he had been the love of her life one day, wasn't it? But each time I took the phone to call, something inside it crashed. Her image next to Daniel, smiling with that glow in her eyes, haunted him. He knew he could never compete with a man like that. Meanwhile, Beatrice's life was in a completely different trajectory. After that lunch, Daniel realized that something bothered her. He had never seen her so silent, so reflective. As they drove home, he looked at her and asked, "Are you well?" She was slow to answer, but finally sighed and said, "Yes. I'm just thinking about how some things that seem so big in the past today, they mean nothing more." Daniel did not insist. He knew that, as strong as Beatrice was, to revisit certain wounds still hurt. But he also knew she was no longer the same girl Samuel had abandoned. That night, lying next to Daniel, Beatrice stared at the ceiling of the room, reflecting on everything he had lived. It was not sadness I felt, but a strange sense of closing, as if finally turned the last page of a book that should have been closed for a long time. Samuel was part of his past, a chapter that for years she tried to understand, justify, until overcome. But now, everything seemed so far away. The pain he caused, the nights of crying, the humiliation of being abandoned, all this seemed to belong to someone else, as if today's Beatrice were a complete strange for that naive young man who believed in his love. Daniel turned on the bed and wrapped an arm around his waist, pulling her close. His touch was warm, safe. "Are you thinking about it?" His voice came low, without judgment, only with genuine curiosity. She smiled lightly, closing her eyes for the last time, and that was it. The next day, Samuel woke up with an emotional hangover. For the first time in his life, he realized that he had thrown away the only thing that really mattered. But the worst was not to lose Beatrice, but to realize that there was no one else by your side. Party friends disappeared when their money began to end. For the first time in years, the silence around him seemed deafening. He got up, took the cell phone, and rolled through the contact list. Nobody, no person he could call true friend, no woman who was there for something beyond her money. He took a deep breath, feeling a knot in his chest. Beatrice had followed ahead. She had rebuilt, found a man who valued her while he was still trapped in a cycle of superficiality and self-sabotage. He decided he needed to see her again. This time, not to try to regain her. He knew it was impossible, but to really apologize. For the first time in life, I wanted to do something without expecting anything in return. Beatrice was in her office when the receptionist called her on the inner phone. "There's a man at the reception asking to talk to you." It says, "It is important." She frowned without imagining who it could be. But as he descended through the elevator and Samuel stopped there with a suit holding an envelope, he felt his whole body stiffen. He looked different. I no longer had the arrogant expression of before, nor the convinced air that always carried. There was something broken in it, something almost human. "What are you doing here?" she asked, crossing her arms. Samuel lowered his head and sighed. "I just wanted to apologize." In truth, he raised the envelope and held it onto her. "And I wanted to give you that." Beatrice hesitated before taking the envelope. As he opened it, he felt a knot form in his throat. It was a check with a high value, enough to pay any debt she had, enough to change anyone's life. She looked up, confused. What is that? I know money doesn't buy the past back. I know you don't. Erase what I did. But this money, it means nothing to me, and I know that if there is someone who deserves something better, this is you. She took a deep breath, slowly closing the envelope before returning it to him. I don't need that, Samuel, but I need to do that. I need to get rid of this. Wait. Beatrice stared at him for a long time before taking a step ahead and holding his hand for a brief second. If you really want to change, it's not giving me money you'll get. It is changing the way you live. Samuel swallowed and nodded. I hope to get one day. She smiled slightly but said, nothing. Just turned and returned to the elevator. When the doors closed, Samuel knew that this was the last time he would see her. But for the first time in years, he felt that he could, in fact, move on. And for the first time, Beatrice left that date without pain, without feeling hurt, just with the certainty that your past no longer defined it. The gift was what mattered, and when looking at the cell phone, he saw a message from Daniel. Dinner at home today? I have a surprise for you. She smiled. Beatrice got into the car with a quiet smile on her lips. The past had finally been behind. But while driving home, he felt a cold in his spine. Something inside her said that Samuel had not simply accepted it all, and she was right. That same night, while Beatrice and Daniel had dinner in the candlelight, her phone vibrated at the table. She looked at the screen and felt her stomach turned. It was Samuel. She hesitated, but decided to answer. What it was. Across the line, his voice sounded different. There was despair, urgency. Beatrice, I made a mistake. She frowned. What are you talking about? I don't know. I ruined everything. I don't know what to do. Samuel, what did you do? The silence on the other end of the line made her restless. Daniel noticed his tense expression and touched his hand. What is happening? He asked in a low voice. Beatrice could not answer, but before he could say anything, Samuel murmured something that made her freeze. Pardon me. And the call fell. Beatrice's heart shot. Something was very wrong. She tried to return the call, but no one answered. What there was? Daniel asked now seriously. Beatrice dropped the phone on the table, trying to organize her thoughts. Samuel. He looked desperate. He said he made a mistake. Daniel frowned. And do you think you should go after him? Beatrice hesitated. Why did you care? Samuel was part of the past. He had picked up what he planted. But at the same time, a strange sense of restlessness took over her. As much as he had hurt her, she didn't want something bad to happen to him. I need to know what is happening. Daniel sighed but nodded. I go with you. A few minutes later, they were in the car, driving around the city, towards Samuel's apartment. When they arrived at the luxurious building, the porter hesitated before allowing them to enter them. Mr. Samuel has not received visits lately, he said, worried, but he looked strange in recent days. Beatrice felt her heart tighten even more. They climbed the elevator, and when they reached the apartment door, she knocked a few times. Samuel! Silence. She tried again. Samuel, open the door. Nothing. Daniel changed a worried look at her before testing the doorknob. The door was unlocked. They entered. The apartment was chaos. Empty bottles spread across the floor, closed curtains, smell of alcohol in the air. Samuel was sitting on the couch, his head down, a bottle of whiskey in his hand. Beatrice felt immediate relief to see him there, but also a tightness in her chest when she realized his condition. He lifted his eyes slowly and laughed without humor. You really came? She crossed her arms. What happened to you? Samuel took a long sip his drink before answering. I realized I have nothing more. No friend, no purpose, no love. This is not true, Beatrice said, keeping her voice firm. Oh no, he smiled bitter. And who cares about me, Beatrice? Who? She took a deep breath, feeling frustration grow inside her. You're feeling like this because you spent years living an empty life, surrounded by people who just wanted your money. And now that all this has disappeared, you don't know who it is. Samuel stared at her for a long time. Then he released the bottle on the table and ran his hand over his face. "What if I want to change?" he asked, his voice loaded with a sincerity that Beatrice had never heard before. "Then change," she said simply. He let out a weak laugh. "It's not that easy." "It's never," Daniel finally intervened, crossing his arms. "But continuing on this self-destructive cycle won't take anywhere either." Samuel was silent for a moment. Then he took a deep breath and nodded. "You can go. I just need to think." Beatrice hesitated but saw something different in his eyes, something I had never seen before. Real regret. "I hope you can, Samuel," he said before turning out to leave. When they arrived in the car, Daniel held her hand. "Do you think he will change?" She looked at the starry sky, feeling a weight out of her shoulders. "I don't know, but it's no longer my problem." In the following days, Beatrice tried not to think of Samuel. He was part of a closed chapter of his life, and she had much more important things to worry about. His work, his relationship with Daniel, and above all, his own future. But something bothered her. She knew how to recognize a relief shout when he heard one. Samuel was at the bottom of the well, and as much as he had done unforgivable things, he was still a human being. She didn't feel sorry for him, but she didn't want to carry the weight of ignoring someone who clearly needed help. Daniel noticed his discomfort. "You want to go after him? Again, don't you?" She sighed, leaning against the kitchen bench. "I don't know. Part of me thinks he needs to solve this alone, but another part knows he may not be able," Daniel added. She nodded in silence. That night, while Beatrice ended up reviewing some documents in the home office, her cell phone vibrated. "A message? Samuel, thanks for appearing that day. I'm trying, but sometimes it seems it's not worth it." Beatrice frowned. That didn't seem like a farewell, but it didn't seem like a request for direct help. She took a deep breath before answering. "Beatrice, you have to decide if you want to get up or keep sinking, Samuel. No one can do that for you." The blue visa appeared, but no answer came. The next day she received an unexpected call. "Mrs. Beatrice, here is from Mrs. Beatrice, here is from St. Patrick Hospital. We have a patient who entered last night and put his name as an emergency. Contact." Beatrice felt a cold in her spine. "Who is the patient?" he asked, already knowing the answer. "Samuel Vasconcelos. Your heart shot. What happened to him?" "Attempted overdose. He was found unconscious in his own apartment. He has been rescued in time and is stable, but it looks like he's refusing visits." Beatrice squeezed her cell phone against the ear. Should she simply ignore? Let Samuel deal with the consequences of his own choices? Daniel noticed his hesitation and approached. "What happened?" she sighed, still holding the phone. "Samuel tried. Kill yourself." Daniel was silent for a moment before saying, "Do you want to see him?" She couldn't answer, but deep down, I knew I couldn't ignore it. In the hospital, the smell of disinfectant and cold lighting made the environment even heavier. When she entered the room, Samuel was sitting on the bed, staring at the window. He did not turn to hear his steps. "You didn't have to come," he said hoarsely. Beatrice crossed her arms. "You put me as emergency contact." He laughed, a bitter laugh. "I think, deep down, I knew no one else would come." She remained silent. Samuel turned to face her. His eyes were back. "Tired. I didn't want to die," he admitted, "but I didn't want to keep living like that either." "Then do something about it," Beatrice answered. "If you really want to change, Samuel, stop waiting for the world to solve it for you." He lowered his head. "I don't know where to start," she sighed. "I didn't know either years ago, but I took one step at a time, and look where I am now." He observed it for a long time. So finally, he nodded. "I want to try." Beatrice realized that for the first time, he was not just saying that from the mouth out. He really wanted. And for the first time, she believed. So Samuel starts now. And so, the man who once destroyed her life began to try to rebuild her own. But this time, without waiting for Beatrice to be part of it, she did her part. Now the rest was with him. And as he left the hospital, he felt that he could finally breathe a sigh of Relief. The past had no more power over it. The future shone more than ever. Beatrice left the hospital feeling the weight of the last page being turned, the cold wind of the night blown against her face. But for the first time in a long time, she felt light. Samuel would now have to fight his own battle, and she would no longer carry the guilt or responsibility for what he chose to do with his life. She got into the car, where Daniel was waiting for her with a comprehensive expression. "How is he?" he asked. "Lost," Beatrice answered with a sigh. "But at least now he admits that." Daniel took her hand and squeezed softly. "And you?" She smiled sideways, looking out the window. "Free." In the following days, Beatrice focused on her own life. The work was better than ever. Her relationship with Daniel was increasingly solid, and, for the first time, she felt she had full control over her future. But then, a month later, something unexpected happened. She was leaving the office when an elegant woman with well-groomed hair and a sharp look approached her at the reception. "Are you Beatrice?" Beatrice analyzed her for a moment before answering. "Yes, and you are Helena Vasconcelos. I am Samuel's sister." Beatrice froze. Helena was quite different from her brother. His posture was firm, imposing, and there was a certain coldness in his gaze. "What do you want?" Beatrice asked, keeping her guard up. "I want to talk." Beatrice hesitated, but finally she agreed. They went to a discreet coffee shop near the office, and they sat on a remote table. "I know what happened to Samuel," Helena started bluntly. "I know he tried to kill himself and that you were the only person who cared enough to go to the hospital." Beatrice crossed her arms. "I didn't do it for him. I did it because I didn't want to carry the blame for ignoring someone who was about to give up on his own life." Helena released a slight cynical smile. "Still, you went, and that means something." Beatrice was silent, waiting for the woman to get to the point. "I want to ask you a favor," Helena continued. Beatrice arched her eyebrow. "Do you want me to help Samuel?" "No," Helena shook her head. "I want you to tell me if he's really trying to change or just pretending to get money from the family again." Beatrice narrowed her eyes. "And why do you think I would know that?" Helena shrugged. "Because so far, you are the only person he has heard." Beatrice sighed, leaning on her chair. "Samuel is at a point where either he changes or he sinks for good. But I am not responsible for that. He has to want on his own." Helena nodded slowly as she pondered her words. "Fair." She took a card from her pocket and slid him down the table. "If he contacts you again, let me know. I'm not the kind of sister who runs her head on her head, but I'm still the only family he has." Beatrice took card without promising anything. The months passed, and Beatrice no longer received news from Samuel. She imagined that he had followed his own way, which for her was a relief. Her life was better than ever. Her relationship with Daniel flourished, and she finally felt that she had a solid future. Until one day, while returning home, he found a letter addressed to her. The calligraphy was familiar. "Samuel." She hesitated before opening the envelope. "Beatrice, if you are reading this, it means I got it. I'm not writing to ask for anything or to apologize again. Just to say I'm trying. After the hospital, I sought help. For the first time, I looked at what I had become and realized I didn't like what I saw. Today, I'm sober. I'm no longer that arrogant man who once left you behind. And even though I know that I don't deserve your forgiveness, I want you to know that I'm grateful that you have appeared in the hospital that day. Maybe one day our ways cross again, maybe not. But regardless of this, I hope you are happy. You have always been strong, Beatrice. It has always been better than me. And now, finally, I'm trying to be someone better either. Samuel." Beatrice closed the letter slowly, feeling a strange peace taking over her. The past, finally, was resolved. Beatrice doubled the letter calmly, feeling unexpected relief. Samuel was no longer part of his life, but knowing that he was finally trying to change brought a strange sense of closure. She was not a grudge or resentment, just the certainty that that chapter was definitely closed. She kept the letter in a drawer, with no intention of answering her. There was a time when any news about Samuel would make her restless, but now that no longer affected her. His gift was much greater than any memory of the past, but fate had a curious way to mess with people. That night, while having dinner with Daniel, her cell phone vibrated on the table. A new message. This time it wasn't Samuel. It was Helena Vasconcelos. "Helena, can we talk?" Beatrice frowned. For a moment he considered ignoring, but curiosity won. "Beatrice, about what?" "Helena, it's about Samuel. He has disappeared." Beatrice's heart shot. The next day, Beatrice found Helena in a discreet coffee. The woman looked more tense than last time. His eyes were tired, and his tone of voice carried a real concern. "He just disappeared," Helena explained, drinking a sip of coffee. "Does not answer calls, does not answer messages. He was doing well, had gotten a job, and was living in a decent place. But suddenly it disappeared." Beatrice kept the neutral expression. "Do you think he came back to the old habits?" Helena sighed. "I don't. No, but he told me he wanted to prove that he could be someone better. He said he wanted to really start over." Beatrice crossed her arms. "And what do you expect me to do?" Helena stared at her for a long moment before answering. "I just need to know if he tried to contact you." Beatrice hesitated. "Even for a second. He sent me a letter. He said he was trying to change." Helena's eyes narrowed. "When?" "A few weeks ago." Samuel's sister was silent for a moment, then nodded. "If he appears again, let me know." Beatrice took the card Helena extended and nodded. Deep down, he expected never to need to use it. The days passed, and Beatrice tried to forget the subject, but something didn't seem right. Samuel was not the type that simply disappeared. Then one night as he left work, he felt a familiar presence. She turned, and there he was. Samuel stopped on the sidewalk, visibly downcast. Her face was thinner. Her clothes didn't have the same refinement as before, but the look was different. He didn't look like the arrogant man who abandoned her years ago. It looked like a man who had passed hell and turned. "I didn't want to scare you," he said, his voice low than usual. "What's going on with you, Samuel? Your sister is looking for you." He smiled in singing, but without humor. "Helena has always been better in taking care of business than taking care of people." Beatrice crossed her arms, keeping her posture firm. "You disappeared. I needed some time to understand who I am without the money, without the old life." She analyzed her words, trying to find some lie there, but for the first time it seemed that he was being honest. "And what did you find out?" he asked. Samuel shrugged. "That I never knew how to be a real someone. I was only a projection of what I thought it should be." The silence stopped between them. "Do you want to really change?" Beatrice asked. Bluntly, "I want," he replied, and there was a new firmness in his voice. She took a deep breath. "Then prove." Samuel nodded. "That's what I'm trying to do." Beatrice looked at him one last time before turning around. "Good luck, Samuel." And with that she got into the car and left, without looking back. Beatrice drove home with her mind spinning. The reunion with Samuel brought mixed feelings. He looked different, but had it really changed? Or was it just one of your attempted manipulation failures? Upon entering the apartment, Daniel noticed his loaded expression. "You saw Samuel, don't you?" She sighed and threw herself on the couch. "Six." He was different, more lost than ever. Daniel crossed his arms, analyzing it. "And do you think he really wants to change?" Beatrice could not answer. "I think he wants, but wanting is not enough. He needs to do something concrete about it." Daniel nodded and sat next to her. "You did your part, B. It is not your responsibility to ensure that it goes on." She knew he was right, but still, he couldn't get rid of the feeling that Samuel was on the verge of something decisive. 3 months passed. Beatrice had no news from Samuel. Helena not either. He simply disappeared from the map. Life followed its course. Beatrice was promoted the director of operations at the company and started working on even larger projects. Daniel proposed her in marriage, and the two began planning a simple but elegant ceremony. The past was finally resolved. Until, on a cold morning while having coffee and read the news, something made her choke. Former millionaire reappears as a social entrepreneur. The transformation of Samuel Vasconcelos. Beatrice blinked, not believing what she read. The report detailed as Samuel had spent months in rehab and then decided to open a center to help former deposits and people who lost everything to rebuild their lives. There was a picture of him next to some people, smiling sincerely. He looked happy. Daniel noticed his surprised expression and approached. Something wrong? Beatrice smiled in the corner, sliding her cell phone so that he saw the story. It seems that Samuel finally found a purpose. Daniel read quickly and smiled back. So, maybe he really changed. She nodded. Perhaps. But this time, he didn't feel weight to think about him. Because for the first time, Samuel was moving on without her, and that was exactly as it should be. Beatrice closed her cell phone and took Daniel's hand. Are we going to choose the wedding invitations today? He laughed and kissed her on the forehead. Come on. And so, with the past finally buried, Beatrice went to what really mattered, her future. Beatrice and Daniel plunged into the wedding preparations. Life followed at the right pace, without startles, without ghosts of the past, just the construction of something solid and true. But fate always had curious ways to test what already seemed res. She looked around, watching the environment. The event did not look like an empty show of ostentation, but something really significant. So finally, his eyes found Samuel. He was on stage, speaking to the audience. It was different, more mature, more centered, wore a simple suit without arrogance. Samuel was on stage, holding the microphone firmly. The hall was full of entrepreneurs, investors, and influential figures from the corporate world. But for the first time, he didn't feel small or out of place. He knew exactly why he was there. A few years ago, I lost everything, he started, looking at the audience. And for a long time, I thought the problem was the world, the circumstances, the people around me. But the truth is that I was the problem. There was a murmur in the crowd. Beatrice, where she was sitting, watched carefully. That was no longer the man she knew. I spent years living with excesses, believing that the money defined my value. But when everything crumbled, I realized that I didn't know who it really was, and it was only at the bottom of the well that I learned what really matters. He took a deep breath, looking at the guests in the first row. Today, this event is not about me. It is not about individual starts. It's about giving it a lot of chances to those who, like me, thought they had no way out. The institute we are opening today will help people who have lost everything to rebuild their lives. Applause echoed through the hall. Beatrice couldn't look away. Samuel changed. She never thought she would say that, but there he was, a different man. After the speech, the guests began to circulate through the hall. Beatrice and Daniel walked together, watching the event as Samuel approached. You came, he said, smiling. Beatrice nodded. I wanted to see with my own eyes if it was true. Samuel released a slight laugh. And what did you think? She analyzed him for a moment before answering. I think you finally met. Samuel took a deep breath, looking relieved. I needed. Daniel, beside her, reached for him. Congratulations on the event. You are doing something really important. Samuel squeezed his hand firmly. Thanks. And congratulations to you both. I heard about the wedding. Beatrice smiled, holding Daniel's hand. Yes, we're happy. Samuel nodded, and for the first time, there was no regret in his gaze. I'm glad you. She realized that he was really sincere. There was no more that man of the past there, trying to recover something lost. He finally accepted that his way was another, and that was liberating. The event continued, and when Beatrice and Daniel decided to leave, Samuel stayed at the entrance of the hall, watching as she walked away. It was the end of a cycle, the end of a story that one day seemed impossible to overcome. And for the first time, Samuel didn't feel like running after her. He just smiled, turned and returned to the event. The future was waiting. The days passed, and Samuel's event soon became one of the most commented news in business circles. He was really changing, and now his new institution was beginning to make a difference. But for Beatrice, that chapter was definitely closed. His focus now was the marriage. Each day, preparations took more shape. Invitations were sent, the chosen place was stunning, and everything seemed a real dream. But fate still reserved a last surprise. A week before the ceremony, Beatrice received a discreet envelope delivered to her office, without sender. She hesitated for a moment before opening. Inside, there, was a letter. "Beatrice, this will be my last contact. I wanted to thank you, not just for helping me when I didn't deserve it, but for showing me, even unintentionally, that it was possible to start over. You were always strong. I always knew what you wanted, and I never understood it until you lose everything. But today I understand. You were my greatest lesson, and so I wanted to wish you happiness, because you deserve it. May your marriage be everything you dreamed of, and may your future be brilliant. Goodbye, Samuel." Beatrice stood there, holding the letter, absorbing each word. There was no pain, no regret, just a definitive goodbye. She folded the paper carefully and kept it, not because I wanted to remember Samuel, but because that it was proof that she was finally free from the past. The following week, in a flower-covered altar in front of friends and family, Beatrice looked at Daniel and knew without a doubt that she was exactly where she should be. When the votes were exchanged and the alliances slid gently by the fingers, she smiled with her light heart. Samuel was part of his story, but not his future. And when she gives the first kiss as Daniel's wife, she knew her fresh start was complete. Now all that mattered was the new chapter that started, a chapter where, for the first time, she was truly happy. The wedding party was a real fairy tale. The hall was impeccably decorated. The soft music packed the guests, and the happiness on Beatrice's face was impossible to ignore. She danced with Daniel in the center of the track, wrapped in a sparkle in her eyes that left no doubt. She was exactly where she wanted to be. The flashes of the cameras captured each moment. Friends and family toast, laughed, celebrated the couple's love. But in the midst of so much joy, a sense of closing hovered in the air, as if life finally had hit the past with the past. That night, when they returned home, Beatrice took off her shoes and collapsed on the couch with a tired but genuine smile. "I never felt so happy," he confessed, looking at Daniel, who loosened his tie and approaching her. He sat beside him, taking his hand. "Because now you are exactly where it should be," she sighed, closing her eyes for a moment. "For a long time, I thought I needed answers. Who needed to understand why some things happened the way they happened? And now?" She opened her eyes and smiled. "Now I just want to live what comes ahead." The weeks passed, and the honeymoon was a real dream. Beatrice and Daniel traveled to a paradise destination, where each day was a new discovery. It was as if, finally, they could live the present without any shadow of the past. But fate still had one last piece to play. Back in the routine, Beatrice received an unexpected call. It was Helena Vasconcelos. "Beatrice, I need to talk to you. It's about Samuel." Beatrice felt a tightness in her chest, but kept her voice firm. "What happened?" Helena sighed from the other end of the line. "He's gone." Beatrice's heart stopped for a moment. "Like this?" He left everything behind. The foundation, the business, disappeared. No one knows where he is. Beatrice remained silent, trying to absorb the information. "Does he just leave?" "Yes. Before disappearing, he signed documents by transferring the institution's management to others, ensuring that everything continues to work without it. And then it disappeared, without leaving traces." Beatrice closed her eyes for a moment. "Do you think he—" "No," Helena interrupted. "I don't think he did something extreme. I think he just decided to start over, far from everything." Beatrice took a deep breath. "Maybe that's the best choice for him." Helena hesitated before answering. "Perhaps." The call ended, and Beatrice stood there holding the phone, reflecting on everything. Samuel, in the end, never belonged to that world. He tried to fix the mistakes, tried to redeem himself, but perhaps his true redemption was far from there, far from everything that once defined him. And for the first time, Beatrice felt no need to look for him, to understand more. She just accepted. The past, finally, had been left behind. She got up and walked to the porch, where Daniel was waiting for her, watching the sunset. "All good?" he asked when he noticed his expression. She smiled softly and nodded. "Yes, everything is exactly as it should be." And as he held his hand, I knew that the real happy ending was not to rediscover the past. I was in fully living the present. The months passed, and Beatrice's life became exactly what she always dreamed. His career was consolidated. His marriage to Daniel was full of complicity and love, and the future seemed promising. The past finally had no more power over it, or so she thought. One afternoon, while organizing some documents in the office, he received a message of an unknown number. "Beatrice, I need to see you. I'm in a coffee in the city center. I know maybe you don't want to, but I just ask for a conversation. Please." She felt a shiver run through her spine as she read the name at the end of the message. Samuel. The immediate instinct went to ignore. She had already turned this page, had said goodbye to him more often than she could tell, but something inside her said that this meeting was not like the others. Daniel noticed his tense expression when he got home and asked. Something had happened. Beatrice took a deep breath before showing the message. Daniel read carefully and, to his surprise, only nodded. "You are going?" She hesitated. "I don't know. I think I've done everything I could for him." Daniel took his hand, squeezing gently. "I trust you, whatever your decision." The next morning, Beatrice had a hurry coffee, and against all logic, decided to go. The next morning, Beatrice had a hurry coffee, and against all logic, decided to go. Coffee in the city center was discreet, almost hidden between old buildings. When he entered, he found Samuel sitting in a corner looking out the window. He was different, slim, with a thin beard and a tired look. But unlike the last times they saw each other, he looked alone. "Thanks for coming," he said when she sat in front of him. "You disappeared," Beatrice answered, crossing her arms. "I needed." He let out a slight smile. "I think for the first time in my life I knew the time to leave the scene." I kept the expression serious. "Why did you call me here?" Samuel took a deep breath before answering. "To say goodbye for good." Beatrice frowned. "Like this?" "I'm leaving the country. Forever." He stirred his coffee cup, looking away. "I'm going to Asia, working with something totally different, far from everything." Beatrice was silent for a moment. "So that's it? Do you want me to want good luck?" Samuel released a low laugh. "No, I just wanted to thank you." She stared at him with caution. "Why?" "Because it was the only person who made me see who I really was, and because I never gave me the second chance. I didn't deserve it." She didn't know what to say. "I spent a lot of time trying to correct the mistakes of the past, but I realized I could never do it here. I needed to disconnect completely. So I'm going. This time, no return." Beatrice nodded slowly. "I think this is good for you." Samuel smiled. "I also think." He took a small box from his pocket and placed it on the table. "This is for you." Beatrice arched her eyebrow. "What is that?" "Just something that symbolizes that I'm really leaving the past behind." She opened the box and saw a ring. The engagement ring he had given her years ago when they still believed they would be happy together. Beatrice took a deep breath, took the ring, and held it for a moment before putting it on the table again. "I don't need that, Samuel." He nodded, taking the ring back and putting it in his pocket. "Me either." The two were silent for a moment until Samuel got up. "Be happy, Beatrice. In truth." She smiled softly. "You too." And so, without more words, he left the coffee without looking back. This time she knew it was the end. And as he went out to the street, feeling the hot sun on his face, Beatrice realized she never felt so light. Samuel was part of a closed chapter, and now all that mattered was what would come ahead. Beatrice stayed there for a few seconds, watching the coffee window as Samuel walked down the sidewalk and disappeared in the crowd. This time there was no weight, regret, or any trace of uncertainty. She was a definitive goodbye, and she finally felt at peace with it. She paid the coffee and left, breathing deep as she felt the hot air of the late afternoon. He walked slowly to the car, absorbing the moment. It was as if a door had been closed, not with a crash, but with a soft click that indicated that it no longer needed to be opened. When he got home, Daniel was on the porch, reading a book. He raised his eyes as he saw her and closed the book with a smile. Then, Beatrice sat next to him and held her hand. He left, this time really. Daniel just watched her for a moment before nodding. "And how do you feel?" She smiled. "Free." He squeezed his hand. "So that's what matters." Beatrice leaned back in her chair, looking at the horizon. The future was before her, and this time she was ready to live it without any shadow of the past. The months passed, and life followed its course. Marriage was one of the happiest moments of her life, and every day with Daniel was proof that she had made the right choice. Her career was still growing, and she began to get involved in new projects that challenged her in unexpected ways. Everything was flowing exactly as it should, until one day she received a letter, without sender. The envelope was simple, discreet, but when opening, Beatrice felt a small cold in her pimple. "Beatrice, if you are reading this, it means that you move on. Finally. It's been months since I left everything behind, and I confess that for a long time I still wondered if I was doing the right thing. But now I know yes. I'm no longer the man you met, nor the one who tried to fix himself too late. Today, I am just someone who found a purpose far from everything, and for the first time, without needing anyone to validate me. I hope you are happy because I am. True goodbye, Samuel." Beatrice closed her eyes for a moment before doubled the letter and keep it in the drawer. Only time, there was no intense emotion, just the certainty that Samuel's story in his life was really closed. And as she closed the drawer and returned to the living room, where Daniel was preparing a special dinner for both of them, she realized she never needed a perfect outcome, just a new beginning, and this finally she was living. The years passed like a soft breeze, turning moments into memories and the present one increasingly solid. Beatrice and Daniel built a stable and full life, full of love, overcome challenges and dreams come true. The past has become a distant memory, with no remnants of pain or nostalgia. Samuel was a name that eventually appeared in casual conversations, as a character from an old book that had already been closed and stored on the shelf. Until any day, something unexpected happened. Beatrice was organizing some rolls in her office when her assistant came in with a curious countenance. "Mrs. Beatrice, sorry to interrupt, but we just received an anonymous donation to the company's new project." Beatrice frowned. "Donation? How much are we talking about?" The assistant put an envelope on the table. 10 million raise. Beatrice's heart shot. "What?" The donor did not identify himself, but said it was someone who wanted to return the good he received in the past. Beatrice took the envelope and opened quickly. Inside, in addition to the confirmation of the bank transfer, there was a small ticket. "A fresh start is only possible when possible. We accept that some stories need an end. Thank you for teaching me that. Now it's my turn to do the same for other people. Take good care of this new project. S." Beatrice stared at the words for a long time. It was not an apology. It was not a contact request. It was just a silent gesture of closing. And for the first time, she knew with absolute certainty that Samuel was exactly where he should be. That night, Beatrice and Daniel walked down the beach, feeling the salted breeze played their faces. "Do you believe it was him?" Daniel asked, holding his hand. Beatrice smiled lightly, looking at the infinite sea in front of her. "I know it was." Daniel watched her for a moment before squeezing his stronger hand. "Do you think someday we'll find yourself again?" She shook her head without looking away from the horizon. "No, and it's okay." They were silent, listening only to the sound of the waves breaking in the sand. The past had finally found its place, and the future never seemed so promising.